I think we're going to start, kind of a natural place to start is just to talk about what do we think we know and why we think we know it. I think, from and then ultimately why any of that matters, why being right or wrong or close enough matters. For me, it's coming from more of a life science and philosophy of mind background, that the thing that strikes me as the potential hubris of our whole enterprise is that there's a clear scientific rationale for being skeptical about our powers to know what's going on here. And that's, if you just take evolution as your starting point, there's no reason why apes like ourselves should know a damn thing about what's going on here, despite the fact that our science and the technology that it spawns is incredibly useful, and we seem to be playing a language game with ourselves, one that's augmented by the language of mathematics, that is producing less ignorance and more knowledge. I mean, it seems to be pushing back the frontier of something that is fundamentally bewildering. There's a mystery that we confront. We don't understand why we get sick, and then we discover viruses and bacteria. And there seems to be progress, right? But it's just, there is no reason to expect that the intuitions we rely on to do science should be fitted to reality in any deep way. Because if we look at our chimpanzee cousins, it's obvious not only do they not know a damn thing about what's going on, they couldn't possibly know a damn thing about what's going on. And we are just a slight iteration beyond them as a matter of just apes having evolved. So where do you, as a scientist, get your confidence that the game you play as a physicist in particular is actually bringing you and other physicists into closer contact with
Yeah. Well, I mean, I share certainly a lot of that intuition. In fact, I had a TV show many years ago where it was on the first book I wrote, and there was one scene where I'm at a blackboard lecturing on the general theory of relativity, and clearly I'm lecturing to a student that's not quite getting it, and the camera slowly pans and it's a dog. And unfortunately, I got so many people, the response was they thought I was trying to say the audience was like the dog, which wasn't the point. The point was exactly the one that you're making, which is dogs are these intelligent creatures, but yet there's a limit to what they can understand. And we think that they don't understand, for instance, the general theory of relativity. And every time I say that, I always think maybe the dogs are out there, they think we don't understand general relativity. But assuming that's not the case, here we have a very good example of smart beings that are limited in what they can understand. So why is it that we aren't in the same boat? And presumably we are in the same boat. So I think that's a given, that we may be limited in what we can understand. But to the specifics of your question, why is it that we think we're making progress? It's very straightforward. We can sit down with the equations of quantum electrodynamics and calculate properties of electrons, their magnetic properties. The details don't really matter, but the calculation agrees with the measurement decimal by decimal by decimal 10 places after the decimal point.
Right.
That's enough. I'm done. I mean, think about that. That is an astonishing fact, that these strange gloppy things inside of our head can figure out the mathematics to understand the property of a particle to 1 part in a billion. And it agrees with the measurement. And at that point, you say to yourself, for some reason that we can't quite understand, mathematics provides this powerful illumination into the dark qualities of the universe and allows us to make progress on questions that don't seem to have any relevance to survival, right? But yet somehow the brain has gotten to the point where it can figure these things out. And I shouldn't even, it's not just they don't have relevance to survival. One imagines that back on the savannah, those of our forebears who got caught up thinking about black holes and quantum physics, they got eaten, right? So it's like not good for us to do this, but yet somehow we're able to.
Yeah, well, we have the last scene that we know about where that was almost certainly true was Archimedes in his bathtub
Yeah, that's a curious one.
Making some more breakthrough in geometry, and then a Roman soldier just came in and impaled him. So first rule of self-defense, you stop with the math when someone kicks down your door. So I just want to revisit some of the points you just made there, because so people have made, I've heard, I've been a consumer of skeptical utterances on this very topic. So I think there was one popular book on physics I read years ago. I think it was probably a John Gribben book, and it was, he said in there that there's a famous paper by Wigner, I believe, The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics and the Natural Sciences, or something close to that title.
Yeah, that's right.
And so it's been pitched as this mystery that mathematics seems to map onto reality in a way that is surprising and counterintuitive, and we're still just trying to make sense of that. But I think it was Gribben who wrote that actually the idea that mathematics that it's surprising that mathematics maps onto reality is a little bit like saying it's surprising that the English language is so good for writing plays in, right? That there's this is the thing we're using, and we're finding ways to fit it to the circumstance we're in. That is, it seems to me that there may be a serious disanalogy there, in that mathematics, unlike English, seems to make predictions about what should be so. I mean, the relationship between electricity and magnetism, say, which then can be tested and proven to be true, that the mathematics itself sort of shines a light in a direction we weren't necessarily looking.
Right.
Is that valid, but is there more to it than that?
I don't think there's more to it than that, but that's a breathtaking quality, right? I mean, the fact that you use English to articulate thoughts and describe situations, sure, that's the mode that we have developed for that kind of communication. But mathematics is not a natural language, right? Mathematics is a way that we have found of encapsulating pattern in the world, but yet when we have identified the pattern, we can then use it to go far beyond the context in which it was developed. So, Einstein is thinking about space and time and the special theory of relativity in 1905, 1906, 1907. Then he takes this mathematics off the shelf in about 1912, a body of mathematics called Riemannian geometry that was largely developed in an abstract realm of mathematics to describe curved shapes, the kind of thing that the idle mathematical mind might find interesting, but not because we were trying to describe the external world. He takes that mathematics, is able to work with it into this generalized version of relativity, the general theory of relativity, and then make predictions about how stars in the distant night sky should look when their light traverses near the sun. And the way that those positions of the stars shift is then borne out by photographs taken 4 years later during a solar eclipse when the stars become visible. Yeah. That's the craziness, right? He wasn't trying to describe the motion and the position shifting of those stars, and yet he was able to make a statement about something that he had never received any data on, and it agreed with subsequent measurements. Right. That's the part that is absolutely thrilling.
So there are physicists and mathematicians that have a quasi-mystical, quasi-Platonic notion about the significance of all this. So what's your explanation, if you have one, for why math seems to reach into the darker corners of reality for us?
I sort of look at it two ways, and it kind of depends on how a given day is going, when you're doing the calculations. I mean, sometimes it feels like you're just sort of chipping away at the stone, revealing the beautiful sculpture, as if it's already out there and all you're doing is revealing it. Other days when it's not going so well, it just feels like you're desperately trying to invent the ideas in order to be able to make progress. So I kind of go back and forth between the two, I have to say. I don't have a consistent view of the role of mathematics in this regard. And I would even say there are times when I don't know if worried is the right word, but I've imagined the possibility that one day we make contact with an alien civilization and they say, hey, show us what you guys have figured out, and we bring out the textbooks with all of our beautiful equations, and they kind of look at it and they go, math.
They put you in a video where you're the dog.
Yeah, right. They basically, yeah, exactly. You know, they basically say, you know, we tried that for a while. It's kind of a dead end, guys. It'll take you just so far.
Yeah.
But then the funny thing is, if I try to imagine what they would replace it with, I can't even think of what they would replace it with that isn't in some sense mathematics, perhaps in an unrecognizable form or an unfamiliar form, perhaps a better way of saying it, because if math is a language of pattern, what are we doing? We're all just trying to encapsulate patterns. So whatever language you use to do that, maybe that is what math ultimately should be described as, and therefore will always be back to this kind of structure.
Right. There's another physicist who I've spoken with on my podcast a couple of times, David Deutsch, who I know you know. Forgive me, David, I've forgotten the reason why you believe this, but I believe he thinks that we are, in principle, we as math-using, language-forming cognitive systems are not cognitively closed to anything that could be known, given, I mean, I think it has, in his mind, something to do with a deep result around information theory and the universality of computation. I mean, but I don't think I can represent his view faithfully here. But the net result is he thinks that the notion that we could meet an alien intelligence or build a super intelligent computer that we couldn't understand on some level, that where we would stand as the dog in relation to that super intelligent system, he thinks that's a false fear or just in principle impossible. Do you have any reason to feel that? Or?
I mean, I have to understand more fully exactly what he's saying, but I mean, clearly, if you take our very species and you just, you know, wind the clock back however far you want to go, 30,000 years, 50,000 years, 70,000 years, I mean, there would be a cognitive mismatch relative to where we are today.
Yeah.
So it's certainly the case that given enough time, we can get to the point, obviously here we are, but I could certainly imagine that we encounter an alien intelligence and they are exponentially beyond anything that we have understood, and therefore we would be like ants.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think that's a good possibility as to why they're not paying attention to us.
Well, I think that's part of his argument, yeah. Actually, that takes me exactly where I want to go, but I think that is part of his argument that we're, given enough time or given enough augmentation of ourselves, we could fuse our cognitive horizon with anything else that we could meet. But on that point, where the hell is everybody?
Yeah.
Maybe you can remind people what the Fermi problem is, and then tell us what you...
Yeah, and Enrico Fermi, great physicist, is credited with, it's usually framed as the Fermi Paradox, I guess, which is, look, there's so many stars out there, so many, in fact, now we know for a fact that there are so many planetary systems out there, therefore you expect there's a lot of life out there. Where are they? Why haven't they come and visited us? It's sort of a quick way of describing the question. And but yeah, I think it's an interesting thought to contemplate. I think there are many explanations for why they haven't come here. It could be, like I was saying, we're just not interesting enough, right? I mean, how many times do we stop on the street and have conversations with bacteria, right? So if we're bacteria, they're like, let's wait, a billion years, and maybe at that point we'll pay some attention. But there are other explanations too. I mean, maybe life is rare, right? I mean, we always have this idea in mind, I think, that at this point life is commonplace. Well, we don't know that. Or maybe life is commonplace, but intelligent life is rare. Right? I mean, if that asteroid hadn't smashed into us 65 million years ago, who knows? Maybe it's still dinosaurs walking around and they're not building radio telescopes and sending out spaceships. The other possibilities are legion. I mean, the universe now, 92 billion light years across, the observable universe in terms of the things that we've had calls of contact with. We have traveled 1.5 light seconds from Earth. We have sent out probes that have gone out, I don't know, 5 or 6 light hours.
Right.
So to say, why aren't they here? The universe is a big place. And it's not so easy to travel over large distances if you're constrained by the barrier of the speed of light.
So what's our furthest impact on the universe? Just bad television from 70 years ago? Is that?
Yeah. So if you
70
take
light
well,
years
no, I mean, I guess TV, radio signals. Go back to say the 1900s. So maybe generously 150 light years if you allow any transmission that we sent out there. So 150 light years compared to 92 billion light years, right? That's not much.
Although the intuition is that if you look at the fact that we have gone from barely walking upright to sending out our own space probes in a very short period of time, so 300 years of practical science, really.
Yeah.
And if you think of any, so I guess the one assumption you need is that there's nothing really special about Earth. And more it seems that even 10 years ago, Earth seemed more special than it does now. Now we're finding planets every day that are seemingly in some kind of Goldilocks zone with respect to their star. And so if you don't think the conditions on Earth are so special, that they're really a dime a dozen out there in the galaxy and in other galaxies, and then you think we're talking about a time window of any place where life gets going and it gets complex is very likely it could be millions of years on either side of us. Anything that's complex that could build a civilization, that is very unlikely to have happened in the last 300 years. They might as well have 300 years plus 10 million years to have gotten that going, right? So then you would expect just the galaxy to be awash in something that we could detect, right? That has been going on for millions of years. I guess the one additional wrinkle that we haven't mentioned is that there could just be something about building a complex civilization, building technology that is lethal to species like ourselves.
Absolutely. It could be that
we're showing every sign of it being dangerous.
Right, exactly. I mean, it could be that once you get to the point where you're able to undertake these kind of grand space journeys, you're in a very dangerous situation, and typically you don't survive. There are more optimistic ways of explaining it, though, too. So maybe the universe is teeming with all this activity. It's just not in the wavelengths that we're looking. We're just not sensitive to it, right? Maybe the time scales over which the vibrations of whatever medium that they're using are incredibly long or incredibly short. So we just hear it as like noise in the background and don't recognize that there's a signal, or we don't even have any sensitivity to it at all.
Right.
So I think
their bad television is coming at a different frequency?
It could well be. Right, so I don't consider it a paradox. I think it's an interesting point of departure in trying to understand whether we're special, whether life is special, whether intelligence is special. But I mean, from your perspective, right? Let's say life is commonplace. The journey from life to intelligence is non-trivial. Do you think that is as straightforward as you might assume in order to come to the conclusion that there should be all sorts of intelligence out there?
Well, looking at Earth, you wouldn't draw that conclusion. I mean,
why?
Even
why do you say that? How many species are there on this planet?
Well, no, I'm saying, I think I'm agreeing with you.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
okay.
that it's. No, I mean, the truth is, it's non-trivial even if you look at our own species.
Yes, that's the point. Good. Yeah.
If you murdered the top, if you took, so how many people on Earth at this moment deeply understand the science required to build intelligent machines, right? So if they all caught a bad virus and died off, how long would it take just the people left to reinvent the computer, right? That's a non-trivial problem for most of us. I mean, if you leave me alone on a desert island with the necessary elements, you're not going to get an iPhone anytime soon. And so that, I mean, in some sense, we're all living on the shoulders of, if not giants, on the shoulders of legacy institutions and ways of doing things that it would be very hard for anyone to recapitulate. I mean, even any group of especially talented, qualified people, you forget how to go, mine the ore that you need to make that circuit, right?
And that's even assuming the existence of us humans already. I mean, if you just get rid of that whole particular branch, then you don't even have anything heading in that direction.
Yeah. So it strikes me as incredibly tenuous and fragile, right? And by no means guaranteed to keep happening. Because again, I mean, the thing that's interesting is that it doesn't, what we're using to do everything that makes us human is not obviously better from a Darwinian perspective as a matter of survival. I mean, because again, in the long run, we could wind up killing ourselves. And there are many things that have persisted as themselves, as discrete species for tens of millions of years. You take something like a lobster, right? Now, lobsters are just doing their lobster thing year after year after year, and they seem to be fine unless we wind up eating too many of them or destroying their environment. There's something quite a bit more precarious about our place in the world, and so it's not even just as on purely Darwinian grounds. It's not like this surfeit of intelligence and abstract thought is clearly something that evolution is an attractor that evolution will keep finding because it's just so good for a matter of survival.
Right. No, I agree. And I think that's a very natural explanation, not the most optimistic of ones, but certainly is an explanation.
Well, I'm rarely accused of optimism, so. He optimistically asks, what worries you at this moment in human history? When you look at how we as a species think about reality and how to live within it, what do you, you and I don't know each other well at all. I don't know, do you pay attention to things in the culture even relevant to your science? Like, is the fact that nuclear proliferation, the prospect of nuclear war, either by design or by accident, the fact that it's almost not talked about at all now, and yet every moment of our lives we've been living under this same sword of Damocles. Is that something that you spend time thinking about, or
no?
No. No. Well, no. It's an honest answer if true. But are you not part of any meetings of physicists that worry about that?
Yeah, it's facetious.
But the truth is, I mean, the horror is that it's actually true for most of us. I mean, like we have gone to sleep on this issue.
Well, I would say that is a reasonable description of me. I mean, we all are aware of these issues. I think about these issues. I don't, from a day-to-day perspective, worry about these issues, nor from a day-to-day perspective do I work on these issues. It could well be that we have lulled ourselves into a state of complacency by virtue of nothing, catastrophic, happening yesterday or the day before. I do, walk around the world with an optimistic sensibility. Yeah. That we will find ways to deal with these issues, but that can be a masquerade for an unfortunate complacency at the same time.
So what are if you could list the problems that you felt we needed to address, if we could get our priorities straight, what's near the top of your list in terms of?
Well, the obvious ones that we would all, I think, put there, we can rattle them off. You started with nuclear proliferation, issues of clean energy, issues of environmental catastrophe, ones, that we just, we were briefly touching upon, when we had dinner just a couple hours ago. Issues of, AI, which I would even frame in a somewhat more general paradigm, which is I don't think we're very good at having the intuition about exponential growth.
Yeah.
It's just not something that we're really good at. I mean, everybody, this is a self-selected audience, but anybody who has never heard of, the standard example where, you get a penny on the first day and 2 pennies on the second and 4 on the third, and so, anybody who hasn't heard that before and learns that by the end of the month you've got $1 billion plus, right. They're like, what? Everybody here knows that, but everybody who's not seen that before, it's very surprising. So I think the scariest things are those which have an exponential growth, and we're not paying attention to them sufficiently early, and we get whacked by the exponential growth of some quality of the world that needs our attention, and we didn't give it attention early enough in the process. And I think, AI is a possibility along those lines.
So you take the notion of an intelligence explosion or some kind of singularity, some kind of breakaway of AI, you take that seriously?
I would say I take it seriously. It's not something that I fear. I don't deeply fear it. And again, I question my own self about that. Should I be fearing it more? And if I ask myself why I don't, it's because I think fundamentally, I think that the people who are responsible for the innovation that, for instance, may yield an intelligence that at some point may far outstrip us, it feels to me that the people leading the charge on that are fundamentally good people. I know these people. Some of the, I just feel that they're good people and that ultimately they will pay attention to the safety issues that need to be thought through. Now,
this
you
is
could
on
say
their, on their 12th Red Bull?
It could be. It could be. We have examples in the past where we thought doomsday was upon us. Nuclear weapons. I mean, there are moments where it looked like we were at the precipice, and we have found a way to survive. And I guess that has given me an optimistic sensibility. It's been challenged. November 8, 2016, it was challenged. It continues to be challenged. But I think fundamentally I'm still in the same place.
Right. Well, you're a New Yorker. You'll be fine, right? Yeah. Well, so I will not take the orange bait there. But to speak generically about politics and kind of culture war issues. So I think you and I take a different line here. So I've spent a lot of time arguing specifically about there being a kind of zero-sum contest between religion and science, right? Or believing things for good reasons and believing things for bad reasons, or flip that around.
Yeah.
And you haven't. I think you've been loath to pit them against one another in a way that will reliably turn people off to science. If you tell people that they can't have their resurrection and their cosmology too, a significant number of Americans will say, well, okay, fuck your cosmology. I'll stick with Jesus. Obviously you're not alone in that. But so, one, do you acknowledge that that's a difference between the way we have kind of played the game intellectually?
I think so.
Yeah.
It'd be good to, if that's something you want, we probably should, expand on that somewhat. But I think that's the case. And my feeling from the outside, watching, and I don't even mean to put you in this group because this may not be accurate, but I've certainly seen certain members of the science community going out into the world in a way that I consider ineffective,
right,
toward their own stated goal, and that feels irrational to me. To go out into the world and tell people that you're stupid for certain kinds of beliefs strikes me as not the best strategy. Right? I mean, the strategy that I feel works is to go out into the world with a passion and enthusiasm for the things that you think are good to understand and important to understand and point in a valuable direction, and to hope that the energy and the momentum from those kinds of conversations will drive things in a good direction. I've never felt the need to go out into the world and slap down other things.
Right.
That's not how I want to spend my time, and I've never found that an effective approach.
Yeah, well, I totally understand that. I think there are some, so having taken the other line, and now I have I have a fair amount of experience with this. I can tell you that there are a few myths here that could be and perhaps should be retired. One is the idea that it simply never works, right? That you can never reason someone out of something they weren't reasoned into. So someone was born to a faith, they've had it drummed into them by their parents, they're now massively attached to it emotionally.
Yeah.
They get to adulthood, it's still the most important thing in their life. They've taught their children to believe likewise. You can't reason that person out of these sets of convictions. That's just untrue, because I hear from these people all the time who have watched some debate or watched some video, no matter how offensive at first glance. They're susceptible to just seeing the bad evidence and the bad arguments that have been propping up their faith, lo these many millennia.
But not to interrupt, let me just quickly say that I agree with the capacity to shift people's attitudes, perspectives, beliefs. Because I've had those experiences too, but I've done it a different way. And when I've gotten people coming up to me or writing me emails saying, now that I understand the fundamental workings of the universe a little bit better and understand the cosmology that the other person might have pushed off, but now that I have an understanding of what modern science is saying about these things, I just find it thrilling, and the other things that used to find gratifying no longer are working for me. Well, so I've seen that too.
Right, no, but that's you're talking about the carrot, and I'm still talking about the stick on some.
Yes, I agree.
So, but
totally get it.
I'm saying the stick also works. But
I guess what I've said to you is, if the stick works and the carrot works, first I think they're probably working on different people. Let's put that to the side for the moment. Which would you rather use? I found you can only hit someone so hard with a carrot. Well, And I found you don't need to hit them at all.
Well, but I should just say, so for instance, just to kind of prep you for your, I think Travis just announced that you're doing an event with Dawkins, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I'm preparing you for your
Thank you, appreciate it. Much appreciated, but I've had conversations in a public setting with them before, but that's okay. Yeah. Please come.
No, but I heard him over my shoulder when you were talking about the generic offensive atheist who wasn't necessarily me. It might have been Richard. But I'm just saying, I'm sure he's sitting on tens of thousands of emails from people who can honestly say, though I thought you were an offensive bastard at the beginning, you actually argued me out of my most cherished beliefs. So that, I'm just saying, that's a matter of sociology that happens, right? Now, but yet it's counterintuitive. We all know that there is this phenomenon. I mean, this has actually been now studied up to a point. This notion of a backfire effect, where when you challenge people's beliefs, and even when you provide them with counter evidence to those beliefs, there's some part of the human nervous system that just doubles down in the face of counter evidence, and they leave this confrontation believing what they believe even more ardently than they did in the first place. So that happens, but I guess in part it's a matter of taste. It's certainly a matter of just how you want to spend your time. I completely get that you don't want to be the guy who is just the go-to guy for why you can't have your cake and eat it too in the matter of science versus religion. But have you ever found yourself on specific issues where to take one, so we were just talking about the environment and nuclear, the prospect of nuclear war. There are religious ideas that seemingly perfectly inoculate people against viewing those as problems. There's no degree to which we could despoil the environment And there's no threat of nuclear cataclysm so salient that could get a fundamentalist Christian, say, who's waiting for Jesus to return and hurl sinners into a lake of fire, to really worry about those problems. Because on some level, those are the things that have to happen as precursors to the glorious end of the world. I mean, it's you just, as a matter of biblical prophecy, you can just connect the dots, and things really do have to go to hell in a handbasket in order for the best thing that's ever going to happen to finally happen. So those are all the signs and wonders that they're waiting to see, right? So if you find yourself in the presence of that kind of dogmatism, where the worse things get, really the better they're getting,
right? Because
Jesus is going to come back and solve all our problems. Don't you feel don't you feel like an intellectual and or ethical responsibility as a scientist to push hard on those specific beliefs that stand in the way of thinking rationally about those problems?
Yeah, it's a good question. In fact, it's one that I have had that conversation with Richard. And we came to an interesting point, which is I'm rarely confronted with the situation that you describe. And we suspect, at least it emerged from our conversation, because there's more of a focus, if you will, on the biological sciences as the place where a fundamentalist religious perspective will look for a point of confrontation.
With evolution,
than with, somebody who's talking about vibrating strings and extra dimensions and the kind of abstract science that I focus my research attention on. So I'm not in that situation. I'm rarely. In fact, I don't think I'm ever in that situation. And that may, if I were, on a regular basis, I'll come along with you. I'll shadow you and
take you to a couple of parties.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Well, so back to your areas of controversy in your world. So as a consumer of physics from the outside, it seems like many people are worried that that physics as a discipline has been more or less moribund for a generation. That you have string theory that this is like the most celebrated thing or was the most celebrated thing at a certain point, but everyone was sort of just waiting around for it to deliver the goods, and it hasn't yet. And you have a whole generation of physicists that got absorbed by this what was a kind of intellectual fashion in theoretical physics, which may not have panned out and may never pan out. Now, these are the echoes of disgruntled graduate students that one hears. What's your view of the state of physics?
I think what you're describing is something that the press has picked up on in various times, and it certainly has echoed in a certain way throughout the public and throughout the press and so on. But the fact of the matter is that physics is theoretical physics is in a very healthy state, in that there are a lot of great ideas and there's a lot of substantial progress. And when one says that a theory like string theory has not delivered the goods, it feels odd for me to hear that. I understand where you're coming from, but it strikes me that it's coming from a place where you've not been within the field sufficiently deep to really see the progress that has been made. I mean, the theory on paper puts together gravity and quantum mechanics. The fundamental theoretical problem of 20th century physics, in principle, has the solution within string theory. Is it the right solution? We don't know, but that's great progress.
But then why is it controversial? Why isn't everyone a string theorist if that marriage has been consummated?
They're just not good enough.
Right.
No, it's
get out on Twitter. We want to spread this around.
The answer to that question, and please don't tweet. That was just a joke. The answer to that question is that it's extraordinarily difficult to test any theory that puts gravity and quantum mechanics together. Extraordinarily difficult because we don't have the technological feasibility, to test the theory in the domains where it differentiates itself from conventional theories. And this is not just an issue that faces string theory. Any theory that puts gravity and quantum mechanics together is going to face this dilemma. So if we were able to build an accelerator as big as the galaxy, then we'd be able to test these ideas. That's tough to do in this funding environment, you know. So that's really the issue. The issue is that on paper, there are features of the theory that are enormously attractive, but we can't test them. Moreover, theorists like myself will also point out the theory itself has gone into some directions that raise questions, interesting questions. A theory that predicts other universes as a possible intrinsic quality of the theory, you got to take a step back and ask yourself, does that make logical sense? Is that a theory that we're willing to take seriously? And, you know, after studying these questions intently for a long period of time, my answer is that, yes, these are worthy of our attention, that these theories may be taking us into the right direction. Do we know that they're right? No. The only thing that will ever establish that they're correct and end the controversy would be to make a prediction and we go out and measure it. And that is the gold standard, and that's something that we've not been able to achieve.